In this video, I'm going to show you how you can take Adalo data and migrate it over to Xano. We're going to use one of Adalo's template apps, which if you want to follow along, you can build by going to Create New App, select either mobile or web app, and then select this template directory, which will create this date night app that you can see here. The date night app is pretty easy. I'll go ahead and log in and walk it through. So you can see here we have a collection of different kinds of dates, and then you can see under each category of dates, we have different actual date nights that you can go out on. And you can see there that I favorited one of them with some details about it. This is one of my favorite date nights here in Phoenix, Arizona. Coming back to the app itself, what we need to do in order to migrate the data is look at our collections. And here we can see we've got three kinds of collections. We have the users, we have the category of the dates, and then we have the dates themselves. There are three ways that we can migrate data from Adalo over to Xano. One is that you can go into the date collection, for example, here, and download it as a CSV and then upload that to Xano. Another is that you could build a button that would allow you to copy from your collection here to a Xano table. But what I'm going to show you in this video is the fastest and most efficient way that I could find to do it, which is actually to have Xano call the collection from Adalo. If you've never looked at the API documentation before, you'll find it right here next to each collection item. This documentation provides us with a curl, which is essentially a call compacted as a single function, and we can use these to create endpoints in Xano that call these data collections and pull the data out. And I'll show you what this looks like on the Xano side. So here you can see my Xano workspace, and I've got my three collections: user, category, and dates. If I go into categories, for example, you'll see here's those categories that we just saw and the images that go with them, as well as I've pulled in some information from Adalo in terms of the ID, when it was originally created in Adalo, and when it was last updated in Adalo. And you can see that here under categories. There's the name, there's the picture, and if I go into the collection itself, you can see those IDs, when it was created and when it was updated. But you'll also see that it's connected to events, which are these dates. So there's our seasonal category with the two botanical garden dates. And the way that we do that connection in Xano is through a table reference lookup. So instead of having the category look up the dates, I actually do it the other way around. The dates are assigned to a category. So here you can see there's the lights at the botanical garden date, and the category that's been selected for it is seasonal, and here is botanical gardens, and that's also been selected to the category of seasonal. So one of the first things to be aware of that's different between Xano and Adalo is that both dates show a category link, and category shows an events or a dates link in this case. So you'll need to pick which table you want to store the relationship on, or in some cases you might create a third table that stores the relationship. But most of the time it's going to look something more like what you're seeing us do here with this date night app. The reason that I selected dates as the place to store the category information is because that's also where I'm going to store the relationship with users, which dates were created by a user and which users favorited a date. So if I come over here to users, you can see created dates and favorited dates. And I'll bring us over to the user side now as well. So we can see that the user has a full name, an email, a password, and then that Adalo user ID created at and updated at, as well as a username. But we can also see that we've got a profile picture here. All of that information is right here: email, password, full name, profile picture, username. And then if we again open up the collection itself, we can see that ID created at and updated. And you can see that the username is blank by default for these users. So that's just a field that Adalo throws in, but doesn't actually use on this app. So once again, if I go back to dates, you'll see that I've got the name of the date, the image for the date, the tip, the location, and description. And then I've got the category for the date, the user that created it, and the users that have favorited those dates. So you can see that all on the dates table. When we look at the dates table, we're going to see that it maps to the dates collection: name, date image, tip, location, full description, category created by, and favorited by. So that's the first choice that you're going to make in migrating data from Adalo to Xano, is you're going to need to think about the relationships that you have and which table you want to store those relationships on. And now we're going to walk through what that looks like. So in creating this table in Xano, as you can see, I've created a text column called name, which maps to the text column called name here. You can see that ID right there. If you click on it, it shows the type is text. And this is a really important thing to make sure that as you're creating your tables on the Xano side, you're selecting the right type of column. So we'll begin here with categories, since it's a little bit of a simpler database, and I'll show you how this would work. So here I've got name, and that's a text type. So I press plus text and then just call it name. And then if I were to save this, I would create that column there. Likewise, for the category ID, that's a number. So I would want to select integer, a number without decimals. And then I could put, Adalo category ID, for example, and save that. And we're going to be going through this in more detail as we talk about the endpoints that actually pull this data in, but it's important for you to know these different types. Another important type for you to understand is timestamp. You can see here we have a date, but we also have a time and a time zone here that's been captured. So when capturing a date, don't use the date column type unless it's only a date. In most cases, you're going to be working with a timestamp, which is the date and the time. And if I look over here, say in the dates that does have, if I look over here in the categories and I look at that created date and time, you can see like that update isn't in the UI here. So I'm really pulling it from this icon here, that it is a date time stamp. Generally speaking, it's safe to start with a timestamp if you're not sure if it's a date or a timestamp to bring the data in, because a timestamp can hold all of the available forms of data and a date can only hold the date itself. All right, so now that we've sort of mapped these out, picture, by the way, is a plus storage image metadata, and then you can put picture. And we're going to be talking in detail about picture metadata here as we build out our endpoints. But you can see that we've got our name for the category, its original ID in Adalo, its original create and update date, and then picture with each of those columns. You'll notice that the ID matches for the category ID from Adalo over to Xano. So you don't have to pull in the ID created at and updated unless that information is useful to you. And when you pull the data in, you can actually make the ID and the created at two of the default fields you get with a table to be populated by this information if you want. In this case, I wanted it to have a record of when the data was created in Xano versus when it was originally created in Adalo, because I find that information helpful sometimes when I'm trying to troubleshoot why I might be having a data issue. So to create a table in Xano, if you've never done it before, just come up here, click Add Table, and I'll just put test here. And you'll see right away, we get that ID and that created at by default with a table. And then we can add the other types that we need. Now, the other kind that we talked about is table reference, and I'm going to show you that with the date night next. But what you can see here is if I add a table reference, I can reference a category, and now I can actually pull any one of my categories from that category list right here. And that's what we're going to be doing with the dates list. So I'll go ahead and delete this test table, and we're going to dive right in on dates. So looking at the data types for dates, you can see name, date image, tip, location, and full description. These are all text types. So if I open this here, I can see that's text. If I open this date image, I can see it's an image type. And if I open up the record here, we'll see that the ID is a number. I created an update, our timestamps. And so just like with categories, we have the same setup here, the name, the date image, the date it was created at. This is the timestamp for when it was created at in Xano, the ID in Xano, which maps to the ID from Adalo. One way that we can make sure that all of our table references transfer. It's not necessarily obvious, but the category for this date, you're seeing the name of the category, but behind the scenes, they're connected by their ID. So it's important that the IDs match. And as we go through our endpoints, I'll show you how that works. So we've got our created by lookup to the user table. The way that we would do that is we'd say table reference user. And there you go, we can see the user ID. So just like I have Brian selected here versus other Brian, and the two Brian users are there, I could pick a Brian user here. So these are lookups to the other tables. Of course, we don't need this one. We've already got it, so I can remove that. And we've got those Adalo IDs created and updated at those two timestamp fields. So that's our dates. Our user table is a little bit different because it is designed to allow people to log in. And one of the things you might notice is that the password is empty. It's not possible to transfer your Adalo users' passwords from Adalo to Xano, because that would be a security vulnerability. So when you transfer your users from Adalo to Xano, you will need to ask them to reset their password so that they can fill in this password for their account when they log back in. But for now, we're going to go ahead and delve into how this actually works on the Xano side. So that's going to live in our APIs. I like to have another tab open for my APIs. So here you can see this is the endpoints that we have here in Xano. The bulk of what we're going to be working through in the rest of this video are these endpoints that I've built here in Xano. I'm going to be showing you how they work, how to build them, and also talk you through some of the considerations. And we're going to start again with categories in working through that. So here you can see that I've got in my function stack an API request to Adalo to pull the categories in. And then we're going to go through those categories and pull the data into Xano. I'll show you this working first. So I'm going to come over here to categories. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these items. And then I'm just going to use run and debug, which runs it internally to Xano. You don't always have to call an API endpoint with Xano from the outside. You can actually use run and debug to run the endpoint right here in Xano. So I'm going to do that now. And it's going through, it's finding all of those various categories. And if I come over to my table here and I refresh, you'll see, oh, there they all are with their IDs, with their images. All of our data is back. Only the created date is at the time of this video. So let's talk through how this works and how you can create it. So first, we want to create at the top of our function stack here an external API request. And in this external API request, remember that curl that I mentioned, we're going to use that to get this information. So back to our Adalo API documentation, you'll see right here, we've got categories, dates, and users. I want to get the categories, get all collection records, and that gives me this curl statement over here, which I'm going to copy and then import curl. So I'm going to paste that in here and import it. And there you'll see I've got my endpoint that I'm going to hit in the documentation. That's right here. So you can see that's the same as what's written here. See how that ends in that 6ACEA, same endpoint. And my Xano request is already populated with the type of request, application JSON, and the authorization bearer token. Now, what I want to show you how to do at this point is how to bring in your own bearer token using Xano's environment variables, because it's much easier. So we're going to come back here to our collections. We're going to go down to our settings. We're going to scroll down to app access, which is all the way at the bottom there. And you'll see that you've got an API key, which you can click here to copy and paste. If you don't see a key, go ahead and generate one. And in Xano, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go to settings, which is a little bit tricky there. It's just above my face, but hopefully you can see that well enough. And you're going to click manage. And then you're going to add a variable. You can just call it Adalo API like I did up there and paste the value in. Of course, I've already got mine, so I'm good to go. What this environment variable lets us do is when we're building out our function stack, we can reference that environment variable. So instead of needing to copy in the API key every time, or if, for example, you change your API key, you only have to change it in one place. You don't have to change it on every single one of your endpoints. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in here, we're going to delete that key, leave that space at the end, and we're going to say concat. And then we're going to go into environment variables and select that Adalo API and update it. And so now that authorization bearer token is going to get the API key from our environment variables, and we'll be good to go. Now you can see here I've created a stop and debug so we can actually see this in action. I wanted to show you how this was created. By the way, you can name the output. Here I've got it named API1, but up here I've named it as API. I'm going to delete this because I've already built this endpoint out. So here you can see I've got that bearer token concatenated in there, and my output, I call it API. And then I've got a stop and debug. To add a stop and debug, you press plus utility functions, stop and debug, and then you select the variable whose value you want to see. This is a really useful way to build the function step by step and validate that everything is working. If you build a whole function and run it, if there's a bug, it can be difficult to know where or how that bug was created. So I like to go step by step. So with this stop and debug, when I click run and debug, I'm actually going to get all of the categories back. So here you can see this is the request header. I've also get the response, which has a header in it, and then I get the results. And here are the records that I was looking for. First date, romantic, adventurous, anniversary, and seasonal. So there are all of my date categories that I recognize, and I can see the underlying ID. I can see the picture with all of its metadata. I can see the date IDs that it's associated with, and when it was created and when it was updated, and there it's really clear. If you see something like that coming through, that is a timestamp format. So if you're never not sure what columns you should create in your table, one way that you can do it is make your API request, use this stop and debug, and you'll get a clue for each one based on the type of information that's coming through. Good way to confirm it. Okay, so I'm pulling through all of this data, but I don't need all of this information. I just need this information right here in order to create my rows in my table. So that's what we're going to do next. And the way that we're going to do that is we're actually going to copy this result. I'll remove this stop and debug because we don't need that one anymore. We've got it right here. But you'll see here, I've created a variable, and this variable is called data. And it is going through the API response. That's right here, API.response.results.record, and then it's pulling all that information. But there's a pretty easy way to do this, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So to create this variable, we go to data manipulation, create variable. In this case, I called it data. We'll just call this data1. But here's the trick. We're going to copy this. We're going to come over here. We're going to select this API, but we're going to click subpath. And we're going to paste that response right in and click define. And what that's going to allow us to do is traverse through the information here visually. So I can go into the response, I can go into the result, I can go into the records, and there I can see, that's the information I want. So I'll click that, and now I've got my dot notation already worked out for me. You can learn more about Xano dot notation in our documentation, and we have some great videos there as well. But this will get us across the line. So to see what that looks like, I'm going to go ahead and disable this stop and debug, which returns the API. And now I've got a stop and debug here, which is going to return just the data. So if I run this again, now we'll see I'm just getting the data back. Great. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to iterate through this data. I'm going to go through each item, item ID 6, item ID 7, and so on, and then take all the information in that item and put it into the table. To see what an item looks like, I'll go ahead and copy this stop and debug. I'm going to put it at the top, and I'm going to change this to item. So we've pulled our data in. I'm going to go ahead and disable the stop and debug. So we pull out the request, we get just the data, and then we loop through that data item by item. So if I rerun this now, you'll see I only get the very first item in this list, which is first dates. So I'll go ahead and disable this now so we can get into how we're going to take this information and put it into the table. The key to this next step is the add record function. We can create that by saying plus database request add record. And in this case, we're going to be adding data to the categories. What you'll see is that this add record has already given us a few things that we can work with. So we've got all of our columns here on the left, the ID, created at, name, the Adalo categories ID, created at and updated at, and then the picture. This all maps to the columns that we have over here in the categories table. When we create the add record, the ID by default is hidden because Xano is going to generate that ID for us. But actually, we'd like for this ID to match the ID that's already in here. And here's the trick. We go in and we click item and then .id. And now that will pull that ID for us. If you're ever unsure, you can use that same process where you go to item, subpath, paste in those results, define, and then you can say, oh, I want the ID, and there you go, item.id. So now the ID in Xano will be the same as the one in Adalo, which helps when we're linking up the data with other tables. The created at timestamp is now by default. We're going to keep that. We're going to do the same thing that we did with the ID for all of these other fields. So we're going to go in and we're going to select item and then .name in this case. It's important that you capitalize anything that's capitalized in the Adalo data set. So if I were to put lowercase name, it would not find this information. It needs to be the same case. So you can put that in. And then I could do the same here. I can type in item.id, just like I did up there. But now you're going to see something that is important to pay attention to in Xano. Up here, you can see this says var any item.id. That means it's actually pulling the value from the variable. Here it says text, which means it would actually put item.id in instead of this ID right here. So it's really important if you're typing in your dot notation that you select the variable because it will update it to variable any and then it will work. So I'm going to do the same thing here for item.createdAt. Or if you want to really make sure that you're spelling everything correctly, you can just come over here, copy that, and then paste it in. Again, if you take that approach, notice that Xano wants me to click here. And if I do that, then that type gets highlighted. Now we haven't done the picture step yet, so I'm going to leave that alone. But this will populate all of the information except for the picture into my record. And I'm going to delete this now so that you can see the version that I created. So here you can see that the item ID is item.id, and all that other information is the same. But the picture is going to pull picture metadata. And we're going to walk through how we build that next. The first step is that I want to capture what the picture's name is going to be, what the file name is here. So if I were to copy this and select item, subpath, and paste it in and define, then I would see, okay, I want to get the picture, but I don't want to just get the whole picture. I want to get the picture file name. And so there's my dot notation. And again, if you type it in, make sure to select that variable so you get that var any showing up there. So now that I know what the file name is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and create a file resource. To do that, I would press plus, content upload, and then create file resource. The first thing we want to do is upload the image to Xano. Then we want to create the image metadata. So that's what we're doing here in creating the file resource. And here's what that looks like. We've got the file name, which we've just pulled out from the data here. The file data is this URL right here. So you can see that image is in Adalo, and what we want to do is upload it into Xano. Again, we can just use the subpath to find that. And go ahead and pull this out. Picture URL. Again, make sure that P is capitalized because it's capitalized there. And then it's going to return this file as a variable picture. We've uploaded that picture URL as we saw here. And now we're going to create the image from file. This is where we're going to create all this metadata that you see here. So the way to do that is hit the plus, go to content upload, go to create image metadata, give it a name, upload that picture, and then the file name in this case could be picture.name. Of course, we've already got this. So you can see here, I call this picture metadata. The value is picture because this file resource is returned as picture. You can see it right here, return as picture. So that file is being brought in here, and then the file name is set to picture name. So now when I add a record, I can reference picture metadata, and that's in my variables. So here you can see there's picture name, picture, that's the actual file itself, and then picture metadata. We want to add the picture metadata to the database, not the file itself. And to see this in action, I'm going to go ahead and use this stop and debug that just pulls the picture metadata. So here you can see is my first date, and what I'm expecting to see is just this information here, but with a new URL, the URL from the image being uploaded to Xano. Let's give it a try. Boom, there we go. So we can see it's in the Xano vault now. We've got the name and the type and the size, as well as its image, the file type, and the metadata of the width and the height. So that's all been captured. So now if I disable this, our records will add it. And just as a way of wrapping it all up, let's do it one last time. We can delete all of those records and re-add the information by running this whole function stack. There you go. It shows me the last one. By the way, what I'm doing here is this is returning the value of categories, which is the very last category that's been added. And if I refresh my table here, you can see all of that data has been re-added. If I go over to my file manager and I refresh this page, you'll see that the very last file is again that same picture that we saw before. So everything has been uploaded into categories and we're ready to go with categories. Our users endpoint can be found in the Adalo group here, get users, and it works very similarly to categories. So we've got this external API request, which I got from going to my collections, users, API documentation, which is open right here. Users get all records. There's our curl statement, so I'm able to copy that and then paste it in to import curl, and it creates this here. Then I concatenate the Adalo API. So exactly like we did before, we return that as an API, then go through with the dot notation, api.response.result.records, and we can see what that looks like by enabling the stop and debug and just running it here. There you go. So now I've got my 2 users, and we can see already that this is one of the main things that we need to consider. As we talked about earlier, the password is going to come through as hidden. So once you migrate your data over to Xano, you are going to need to ask your users to reset their password so that an actual password is stored. Once we've gotten our users, we're going to iterate through our users as items, and we're going to do the same thing that we did before. We're going to have the ID be the item.id. We're going to have the full name be item.fullname, the email, item.email. Password we're not going to bring through because it would just be hidden anyway. User ID, user created at and updated at, same as before. Username is there just for consistency. And then that picture metadata. That has the same process that we went through before, where we get the picture name, but in this case, it's called profile picture. So again, I can copy that result. I can go to item subpath, paste that in, define, and then find my way to profile picture, file name. And you can see sometimes the subpath will add this .0. That's not needed. You can go ahead and just remove that. So it just says item.profilepicture.filename. Once we've got our picture name, we'll go ahead and upload that picture itself. So this is the item.profilepicture.url, uploaded as picture. And then we'll create the metadata, picture metadata from picture, using that picture name as the file name. And then add that picture metadata here to upload it. And you can see add record is returned as user 1. And so that last user, once this for each loop has concluded, will be shown here. Now, if I were to rerun this now, I'm going to get an error that says duplicate record detected. And that's because I'm using the same ID, which is great. That's what we want. So if I come over to my users now and I delete them and I rerun this function, it's added my 2 users, and I can refresh, and there we go. We can see that I've got my 2 users in here, and including the profile pictures. So our user table is good to go. Last but not least, we've got our dates. In our getDates function, we're going to cover a new part of the puzzle in terms of bringing data from Adalo to Xano, which is when you have a lot of records. It's important to note that in Adalo, here we've got our dates documentation, collect all records, that Adalo has the ability to pull 100 rows or 100 records or fewer at a time. So if you had like 1,000 rows in your collection, you're going to need to use 2 keywords, offset and limit. So right here, you'll see by default, Adalo allows you to do 100 or fewer records at a time using the limit parameter. And then you'll need to use the offset parameter to specify how many records to skip. So for example, if you pulled 100 records, your offset would then be 100, so that your next pull would be 101 to 200. And then your offset would be 200. So then you'd pull 201 to 300 and so on. Note that the curl over here does not have offset and limit. So we're going to need to add that in. We're going to come down here. Here's our API request. And I'm just going to show you once again, pulling in the external API request, importing the curl. But now we're going to do two things. We're going to add two parameters, and you can see these parameters right here in this example curl that they provide, offset and limit. The way to add parameters is to use set. So I can say set offset, and we can say the offset is 0 because we want to start from the beginning. And then set limit. And the limit by default would need to be 100 or fewer. And of course, we're still going to want to go into this authorization token, remove that key from here in case we ever need to change it in the future, add that filter to concat, which by the way, concatenates two string values together. Go get that environment variable. There we go. So now we have this external request ready to go with offset and limit. Now I've already created that here, so we'll just review it. You can see we've got that we're going to pull through offset and we're going to pull through limit. Let's go ahead and get this token updated to use the correct one. There we go. So what you can see here is instead of saying 0 and 100, I'm specifying the limit and the offset in variables up here. And we'll walk that through now. So I'm setting a limit of 2, which means it's going to pull 2 records at a time, and then it's going to need to make another request. And the offset is 0, meaning I want it to start at the top of the list. And then I've created a variable called check offset, which is just basically to make sure that we haven't run out of records to pull. So I'll show you this in step by step. First, creating the variable. So just as a reminder, go to data manipulation, create variable, and then you could say limit, and then you could set that limit to whatever number under 100 or less makes sense to you. You can even do a limit of 1. I've already got that variable here, so I'm not going to save that. I've created a variable called offset with the starting value of 0. And then I've created this while loop. Now, here's what happens if I don't do a check offset. If it runs out of rows to pull, it'll just throw an error. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting check offset to 1, just giving it a value. And I'm saying if check offset, right here, if check offset does not equal null, meaning there's nothing left to pull, then I want you to go ahead and pull the next round of data. So to create a while loop, the way that you do this is plus data manipulation, loops, and then while loop. So this will iterate while a condition is true. So in other words, it's going to keep pulling the next set of records as long as it doesn't run out. We've got our API request here. And what we're going to do in this API request, and I'll show you this information. So we're going to do utility, stop and debug, pull that API again. All right, great. So let's go ahead and run this so we can see it in action. There we go. I said that I wanted to pull 2 starting from the very beginning. And if I look down at the data that I got, there's record number 1, the Great Forest Park Balloon Race. Record number 2, cooking lessons for 2. And that's it. We're done. And you can see here, it returns to me offset 2. So it's letting me know, hey, you pulled 2 records. Your offset should be 2. So the next record that you pull is 3. And we can see that that lines up in our data here. When we look at these dates, there's our Great Forest Park Balloon and cooking lessons for 2. So you can see how that's been mapped. All right, so now that we've gotten our API data, what we want to do is we want to just check this offset. What is the offset that we get back from this API request? And the way that we do that is api.response.result get offset. And the reason we're using get offset is if the offset is no longer there, I'm going to show you what happens if we offset this to, say, 50. Now, just to remind you, there are only 11 records here in dates. So what I've said is start on record number 50, which we know there isn't one. So there's our offset. It's going to go and try to make that request, and you'll see here that that offset will not exist. So if I press this here, so there's my offset 50, my response is no records and no offset. So that's the key. The key is that once you've run out of records to pull, Adalo will not provide you with an offset back. And so the way that we handle when some information might be missing from JSON is a get statement. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So what we can do in pulling our API response, first off, we do want to get that offset back in. So I'm going to rerun this now. And there we go. There's our offset again at the bottom. And we want to find it. So I can just plus this. What I'm doing is I'm taking this variable that I created, check the offset, and now I'm updating it to the value that Adalo has actually given me, in this case, 2. So the variable that I'm going to update is check offset, and then the value is just API subpath, and I'm going down to response and to result, and there you can see there's my offset. But instead of doing .offset, because as we mentioned, sometimes it's not there, I'm just going to do .result, and I'm going to add this get. So here's how you do that. You've got your API response .result. You go get offset is what we want. And the default value will be null, meaning if there is no offset, then make check offset equal to null, and then our while loop will stop running. So we go ahead and do that, and there we go. The path is offset, and the default value is null. Okay, so now our check offset is ready to go. We're going to go ahead and get that data just like we normally do, getting that API response result records. And if we want to see what that data looks like, I can just run it here. And there you go. So now we've got those two dates, but no additional data like offset below the bottom. And then we're doing the same thing that we've done before, where we iterate through each one. So here's our first item standing alone, just the Great Forest Park balloon race. And like we've done before, we're going to go ahead and add all this information in to the actual database with an add record, setting the ID to item.id, name, tip, location, description. But now we've got a couple of interesting things happening, because in dates, we want to associate the date with the category and with the user that might be appropriate. So here we can see that categories is 8. And the way that we're going to do this is using that get statement again. So we're going to use item, and then we're going to add that filter get. And this time we're going to pull category, and you can see I just copied and pasted so that it's the right capitalization category. And if there's no value, it's null. But then I add this filter called pop. So I'm going to walk you through this one step at a time. And we'll go ahead and use a stop and debug to show you what's going on here. So if I were to pull the item, and I were to pull .category, and put that above before we add that record, what you can see here is that the category comes back as an array. But my database isn't designed for an array. It's only designed for a single ID, not a list of IDs. And you can see that by clicking on your column. And if you go to settings, if you go to change type, you'll see right here, structure signal. If this was structure list, then I could put an array in it. Because it's structure signal, I can only pass in an integer. So if I were to put in an array like this, I would get an error. So what I need to do is I need to pop that value off. So pop falls under our array filters, and it pops the last element of the array off and returns it. In this case, the array only has one value, so I can safely pop that value off. And so now when I rerun this, I just get the number 8, which will allow me to update the database. So that's what we're doing here for the category and for the created by. Because when I rerun this, duplicates there here. Let me get the item. Turn on that stop and debug for item again. So here's our item. And what we can see is that category is 8. If we go to one of the other table references here, categories is going to be a single. This is a single integer, but favorited by, a date can be favorited by more than one user. So if I go in here and I look at this type, you can see it says integer, but the structure is list. So this one is expecting more than one integer in an array. And to create that, you would do plus table reference user, and then over here, you would need to change the reference type to list. So now I'd be able to store more than one user in this particular list here. So you can see there, I can store 2 instead of just the 1. So that's what we're making sure that we can do here with our function stack. Great. So coming back into our add dates, what you can see here is that I'm getting the category ID by getting get category and then popping it off. Created by is null in this case, but if there was a value, I'd pop it off. But here for favorited by, I say get favorited by. It's null if it's empty, but I don't use pop because I'm not trying to pop off the last value. I actually want to provide the full array. Okay, so same thing, the picture process works the same. We're uploading item.dateImage.filename for the picture name. For the file resource that we're creating, it's item.dateImage.url. And then we're creating the image metadata by pulling in the image and giving it the picture name. So you can see here, this says return as image metadata, and then here at the bottom, we've got image metadata for the date image. So we're all set to go here. So in our while loop, we are pulling two records. We're then going to go for each through them. We're going to add a record, and then we're going to add another record. So we'll have added our 2 records. Then we're going to get to a conditional if. And what the conditional if statement is saying is, if check offset equals null, meaning that no offset was provided in the API response, break out of the loop because we're done. But if not, then change the value of the offset to the offset plus the value that we received back. So basically, we take the offset that we have and we add the limit. So if check offset isn't null, that means an offset was passed through. We're just going to take the offset and we're going to add the limit. Now, the offset that was provided by the API can also be used here. So instead of doing it like this, I could say the same thing that we did up here, which is api.response.result.get. So we could actually get the offset if we wanted to. In other words, we could rely on Adalo to tell us on what offset we're on, or we could just create that ourselves by doing the math. Well, we haven't run out yet, so the offset is going to add the limit. I decided to take this approach just because then I didn't have to worry about whether or not there was if the offset value had changed on the Adalo side in any way that didn't make sense. But you can do both. Okay, so we've got the offset here. What we do is we take the offset that we have, in this case 0, add the limit 2. So now our offset is 2. and then we're going to continue to the next iteration of the loop. So if I go through here and I delete our dates, and I rerun this, and I'll make sure to turn off the stop and debug here, rerun this, we'll see that it's going through 2 records at a time, and it's adding them to our database. And then when it's done, if I come over here and refresh, boom, there we go. All of our records are here. We've got all the correct IDs. We've got all the correct user information, and we're set to go. So that is a sort of full walkthrough of how you can take Adalo data and bring it into Xano using the collections endpoint that Adalo provides. A couple key things to note from this stage forward. So in Adalo, your collections can either be Adalo collections or Xano collections. So in order to then bring this data into your app, at this time, you're going to need to recreate your app using the new Adalo collection. And the way that you would, Xano collection, the way that you would do that is you create a new app, you'd select it here, you click advanced option and use Xano database as your new authentication. You can then create your app and bring your Adalo data in, and then you'd need to recreate your interface here. So that's something certainly we'd like to see become easier in the future, but for now, important thing to note that if you're moving all of your data to Xano, you will need to recreate your Adalo front end to attach your Xano data to it. Feel free to reach out to us on support or in the community if you have any other questions, and also join us for office hours. At Xano, we have office hours every week, and that's a great place to get help if you get stuck on any of these items. Maybe we'll see you there.